I just want to thank everyone from joining, and whoever else will be joining in a few minutes, hopefully. And there are already, I think, enough people to start. This week, we'll go into a few seconds, we'll talk about Salesforce and HubSpot integration and best practices based on Micha's experience and my experience working in HubSpot and Salesforce, and how to manage this and get the most out of the integration. Today, I'm very happy to be back actually at a partner day for HubSpot. So I'm actually ducking out of a partner roundtable meeting just for an hour to do this webinar. So we're doing it from HubSpot House in Dublin, and Micha's in our offices in Tel Aviv, just north of Tel Aviv. Miha, maybe introduce yourself, and then we'll dive in to the interesting stuff.
Hello, everyone. I'm Miha. I'm a chief architect here at Penguin and a partner. My experience is about 15 years ago when I started working with Salesforce. So my main focus is on Salesforce, but beside that, I've been working with a lot of CRM systems, databases, integrations, and I was a developer at the past and still developing on my own. So I will wear Salesforce set for today. Mark will share his HubSpot experience. I can share my Salesforce experience, and of course, see some cool hacks. And that's it, Mark.
Great, excellent. So I think we can start diving in. So as I said before, we're going to focus on the HubSpot Salesforce integration, which is something that has existed, I think, at least as long as I know. We've been working in HubSpot for 10 years. So when HubSpot just had the marketing hub and the marketing automation connected to Salesforce, so I think it's the longest, I'm sure it's the longest integration that HubSpot has, and it was set up by HubSpot and Salesforce back in the day, and has obviously seen revamps over time. Mick has introduced himself. So we over the years, Micha, we've been having lots of questions on the basic things to look at and where should you focus. Let me just I think most people, I'm assuming, and maybe if people can actually put in the chat now who uses the Salesforce HubSpot integration, just put in yes in the chat here, then we can get a bit of an idea at what level people are actually who have joined this webinar. I think that will be interesting. I'm assuming we don't need to go into the basics of how to set up the integration. That HubSpot has a great documentation. You can go and find that online. We can send out the links afterwards if anyone's interested. But just on a high level, this obviously exists so that you can sync if you're using HubSpot as a CRM, or even as an outreach tool in Sales Hub. And in both cases, you need to connect to Salesforce as your CRM. Then HubSpot is the marketing automation. Then you'll want to connect the Salesforce HubSpot integration, which will connect the dots between the two databases and make sure the flow between leads go in from the marketing automation into the Salesforce CRM. Micha, before we deep dive, I think there are a few things that tell me that we can, before we jump into the interesting hacks and specific use cases that I know that you bump into and that we've come across over time. But as you know, I think most of the customers that we come across, or most of the customers that are using Salesforce, have HubSpot as their marketing operation, their marketing automation on the one side. So they're using this sync. And just on a high level, maybe let me just take a look at this, and then we can go into, just so people understand how it's built. So on the HubSpot side, you have contacts, and then the Salesforce side, you have leads and contacts. Obviously, that's bi-directional. The company will sync over to the account, correct, in Salesforce, and then your deals can have a bi-directional sync to the Salesforce opportunity object, And over time, they've added, which now I think is very powerful, is the timeline events, which we can push from HubSpot to Salesforce, correct? Like form submissions, emails going out, open emails, click emails, so on. And obviously tasks now and custom objects, which I think we're going to touch on a bit later, correct? And see how you can actually utilize that in an interesting way. Maybe let me just show everyone what the connector looks like, just in case, before we actually deep dive into things that they should be looking at. But if I look at a connector here, hang on one second. So I'm sure everyone's, has seen that you have the connector here between HubSpot and Salesforce that's been connected inside your connected apps inside the marketplace. And then this is divided, as we said. We have your contacts, which is your full mapping between, as we said, the HubSpot properties on the contact object, and then the Salesforce properties with their leads and contacts in Salesforce. Companies, the same thing with the properties, correct, between HubSpot and Salesforce. And the same thing we talked about, the mapping between deals, activities. As we said before, you can create a form submission, sync, and so on and so forth. You can actually go into all of the, even if you're using HubSpot Sales Hub as an outreach tool, you can use the sales content viewed, sales call made. So if I'm using this as an outreach tool, even if I have Salesforce, I can push that data back into Salesforce. Tickets will connect also today with Salesforce cases, which is relatively new. And then obviously we have custom objects like we talked about. We'll talk about Salesforce campaigns and sync any custom objects, create them in if you have enterprise in HubSpot, and then sync them between HubSpot and Salesforce. That's number one. Number two, it's a good idea for you guys to always go into the feature discovery and see that HubSpot has a brand new embed that you can push into Salesforce and see what new things pop up here. Obviously, just on a high level, it's important to actually decide which direction it's connected and who it's connected. But I think maybe what we can start with, so this, I think everyone is probably aware of this and how this works. Maybe what we can focus on, and let me share my screen again, is, Micha, start with, if you're looking at a system like this to kind of audit and see what is the situation of your sync, because I said we're not going to touch on how to set it up. I think that's something that everyone can just go in online and follow that. What are the things that you think people should focus on when they're looking at the connection that already exists between HubSpot and Salesforce when they look at the connector?
Okay, so if you can go back, or you know what, I'll share my screen.
You want to share your screen? Go for it.
Well, share the presentation. It's what I wanted to share with the previous lead and contact. Can you share the screen again? Thanks. So, can you go to previous slide?
Yeah.
This one, yeah. So one man, it's not an issue, it's some kind of misunderstanding of how the sync is working is on the contact object. Because as you see here, we have contacts on HubSpot, and in Salesforce is using another methodology. They are using leads, and when lead is qualified, you need to convert it to a contact, a count, which is company, and an opportunity. And by the way, you can't go back in Salesforce to lead. When it's converted, it's converted. And HubSpot, using simpler method, we have contacts and we have lifecycle. So there are issues that with syncing and mapping, that you need to map the contacts to two objects. You need to map it to lead, and you need to map it to contacts. Because sometimes in contacts, you don't have the same field name, you have a different field name. And I want to share something with you.
So you share, then I'm stopping the sharing. So what you're saying is that I might have to make sure that the mapping happens. You're assuming that the mapping is happening with the same field, but because you have a contact and a lead, I need to make sure that it's the same field that exists on both same names with the same internal name. Otherwise, I'll have to map twice.
Correct.
Got it. Interesting.
Correct. And
otherwise, when you convert the lead, then that information disappears. It doesn't actually move over. Yeah,
that's it. Okay, this is our HubSpot environment. And as you can see, we have mapping, but I don't know if it's a lead or contact on Salesforce side. I have the Salesforce field and I have the name, but I can't know if it's a contact field or a lead field. But what else I can figure out from this list is if I have a custom field. Let me look if I have a custom field here. You know what? Let's try to add a new map. I don't have, okay, this one. Let me save this property. And if it's a customized field, I can see __C in the end of the field name. As product interest is not the standard field product interest, it's a customized because there is a C value in the end of the API name. But in this view, it's really hard to understand if it's a lead, if it's a contact field, and there need to be you need to get access to your Salesforce or contact your Salesforce admin in order to understand where this field is located.
So you need to make sure that you look at the internal name, which says product interest _C, and make sure that if it exists in the lead level, in the lead view in Salesforce, that they're using the exact same internal name on the contact one, and then I don't need to map it out twice. It will work whether it's a contact. And what happens if it's different? Then I need to actually map it again. I need to make sure that
map it again. Yeah, to the contact object or to the lead object.
And then I'll see the reason it will allow me to map it is because I'll see there's actually two internal names on the Salesforce side. So on the HubSpot side, it'll be the same field, but on the Salesforce mapping, it will be two fields. Can you go back to what you were showing? I want to bring up one other quick thing, which I think is important on the mapping. So if you go into annual revenue or any of them, just click into that to edit it. So there is the option to decide prefer Salesforce unless blank, always use Salesforce in two-way, and then don't sync. So don't sync, I think, is obvious. If you decide that it's a custom object that already syncs and you don't want to sync, but preferred Salesforce unless blank, and tell me what you think. The way we use it in most cases is if you want HubSpot, for example, like email, first name, so on and so forth, or lead source is a very good example, where you want HubSpot to update Salesforce when it's blank, as it says, for the first time, but then for Salesforce to always keep that value and not allow HubSpot to override it ever again. So lead source is a great example where you want to push that over to Salesforce. It's a one time and it shouldn't change. And always use Salesforce is if the data is inputted in Salesforce and we never want HubSpot to override it. So then you always use Salesforce. And to name would be like phone number or anything that a form submission or anything else would be updated, and you want to have the most updated data based on whatever system is being updated. If a salesperson is updating in Salesforce, then it will come back to HubSpot, or if HubSpot is updating it based on a form submission and then pushing it back to Salesforce. Is there anything else here that we need to take into account around this mapping?
The only use for don't sync is when you can't delete mapping because it's a standard mapping, you need to use the not sync. That's the only use method I know. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. This is the only use for this choice.
Yeah, so if you have like a out of the box opt-in, for example, and you have a customized one that you want to use in Salesforce, for example, in HubSpot, then you'll switch it off by clicking on Don't Sync, and then you'll map over your custom version. If we're talking about the sync, and we'll go into other issues, but there's another thing that I think I'm coming across that it's a good idea. What do you think about, so we talked about mapping over the different objects. So obviously all the data in the CRM, I want to go from a lead to a contact, from a lead to a contact, obviously anything from the company and the deal. If I'm using Salesforce as my CRM, so is the best practice that I push data in from HubSpot to Salesforce, and then in that direction on the contact level and lead and contact, and then on the accounts level and the deal level, we'll go into that a second. I'm assuming that's where I'm actually creating the account after I convert it in HubSpot, in Salesforce, the lead into a contact, open an opportunity, open an account. So in most cases, what do you see? That information actually just gets passed back from Salesforce into HubSpot, correct?
Correct. There are some acts that we want to share with you in this session, but most of the time, yeah, this is the preferred method.
Got it. So those are the two objects, and there's a third object about the task. We talked about form submission that I can actually push forward. If you go there, just take a look at activities. So what is your suggestion about creating these activities? So for example, just so we understand the use case, if someone fills out a form submission in HubSpot, we want on the contact or lead level to be able to see an activity or a task inside Salesforce that they filled out any type of form. Is that something that you've seen across the board that people are actually enabling, so that information automatically, that activity from HubSpot gets passed into Salesforce?
If there is no automation on Salesforce side, usually we can use the Visual Force component, the HubSpot Visual Force, that's showing your the contact last activities. Because activities on Salesforce, the object name, it's called tasks in Salesforce, never mind, but the data storage is very limited. Every activity is 2 kilobytes, and Salesforce are still stuck in 15 years ago about data storage limits. And most of the time when I see all activities synced to Salesforce, then there are issues on Salesforce side and storage limitations and notifications and even system outage. So my suggestion, if you don't need this activity show in Salesforce and you can use the Visual Force component, use the Visual Force and don't use activity sync. This is my experience with that.
But if form submissions are coming in a few forms a day, then form submissions...
Yeah, so I will select only form submission, but I will not select any...
mail sent, for
mail
example.
view, but yeah.
Got it. Okay. Because then I can send out an email to the entire database, and then suddenly I'll use up all the API calls within a day, within a few
API calls and data as well.
Okay. Let's touch base before. So if you go to the feature discovery, I mean, you know what, let's go back to our, can you click on Sync Health for a second? I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of this error, and we can go into the type of errors in a second. One thing you can do, correct, is if you can click on Manage Notifications, and you can actually set up an internal notification so that you don't get any surprises, and that comes through either instantly, daily, or weekly, I think. And you can actually, I think you'll show us later how I can connect that to Slack as well. But I think that is something that has to be done when you set this up, so that you don't have to go in on a daily basis and see what's happening, but make sure that you manage, because some of the sync errors are going to be not much, not make such a difference, and some of the sync errors will actually stop the data going in from HubSpot or carrying on syncing between those, and those changes could be really important that both sides are not seeing. I think let's focus a bit on the different things that we talked about when it comes to the audits. Okay. So I know one of the issues that you and I have bumped into quite a lot, and a lot of companies have, is like, what do you do with duplicate companies? How do we handle that, and why do we even have duplicate companies happening in Salesforce, obviously, and then why do we have different versions of, let's say, Penguin strategies? We could have 3 versions of Penguin strategies in HubSpot, and maybe 2 versions in Salesforce. What are your suggestions on how to have that? Because I know that that's one of the issues where we even have companies that says, let's not sync back to HubSpot accounts into companies because it actually creates duplicates. So how can we actually handle that?
So first, we must merge the data. If it's companies, contacts, deals we don't have duplicates, it must be done in Salesforce side, not HubSpot. This is my best tip for you. Don't merge in HubSpot, merge it in Salesforce when you have sync enabled. And that's the...
I go into Salesforce, let's say I have penguinstrategies.com and penguinstrategies.com, but the one has a different name. I make sure that I merge the 2 accounts in Salesforce, and then I go and look for
Salesforce
in HubSpot, yeah. and then I can merge them. Obviously, once I've already merged the 2 accounts in Salesforce, then it will be easier because I'll know which company I need to, or which ID needs to merge and carry on syncing between the 2.
Correct. So in Salesforce, if I want to merge, by the way, merge accounts, I can't just click and record and do merge. We don't have this kind of button in Salesforce, but there is an old trick. You can go switch to Salesforce Classic. I'll show you something really cool and old. And if you browse to the accounts tab, there is an old tool called Merge Account. And this tool allows me to merge 2 different accounts that I want to merge. Never mind, the name is not the same, the domain is not the same, but I can. That's Penguin, and I don't know, I need to search for another name. I don't have a test.
But that allows me now to merge between them.
Yeah, and I don't need to, even if Salesforce doesn't match them as duplicates, I can decide that they are duplicates and merge them. No.
Got it. Okay. And then I would go into HubSpot, obviously, and then I would be able to merge. Okay, got it. And then I'll go into HubSpot and I would search for those 2 accounts, companies, and then merge them as well. Another suggestion while you're doing that I've come across. Okay, so now it actually merges between them. Cool. Is so HubSpot has out of the box that any contact that gets created based on the domain creates a company. And my suggestion has always been for customers is that if you're using Salesforce as your CRM and your accounts are getting created in Salesforce originally, not in HubSpot, not to switch that ability on, because what it does is that you end up creating companies in HubSpot irrelevant of that account, if that account exists or doesn't exist. So I think that's something that if you're setting it up from scratch or you're auditing, you need to switch off and say, okay, I need to decide where am I creating the accounts. If I'm creating them in Salesforce and getting them to sync over, then that's fine. I'll create them in Salesforce. They'll sync over and we're good to go. But if HubSpot creates them automatically every single time a new person comes in and fills out a form based on the domain, which if you're using HubSpot CRM, that's great. But if you're using the connector, then you're already creating duplicates just by going forward.
Mark, where is this setting?
Yeah, so if you go into objects, good point. If you go into objects in settings.
Give me a second.
Just below properties, objects, and you click on companies. You'll see the first box here that says associate. Sorry, if you go, not companies, you go to contacts, just go up one. So the first checkbox automation that exists is that based on the domain, it creates a company and associate. So that is a bit problematic. Assign company, fill out details, email. Oh, so I think you were right. I think it was it's where the company is. Go back.
Where the company?
Yeah.
Okay.
I keep forgetting it's in the site. So that's something I think that's important. It's a decision. Yeah, create an associate company. Yeah. So the good thing is that it automatically connects everyone. The bad thing is that it creates a company. Now, if you're going to create your target companies because you have account-based marketing, then I don't think there's an issue because you will create all your accounts in Salesforce and they will create companies in HubSpot out of the box. So 90% of the companies that you're targeting or that you want to already have should be already there. And then you can keep it switched on because what will happen is it will just associate people and then in essence, it will be fine. So that's one tip that I think is important to take into account. We talked about sync errors. So maybe let's jump onto that. If you're talking about sync errors, what are the kind of things or the properties that we're coming across that we know we have issues with? Country, state, pick list in Salesforce, a pick list in HubSpot. How do you deal with those kind of things when you set it up? I know HubSpot out of the box, the pick list for country and state is actually a text. And then if I want to enable that as a pick list in HubSpot, because I want to have that as an opportunity for people to fill out a form and not actually just write in a basic text, which is good. What do you do on the Salesforce side? Do I enable the Salesforce pick list as well and then map over between them? I know that's one of the biggest issues between both sides. So what is your experience on that?
In Salesforce, state and country is not a pick list by default as well. You need to enable this. And if it's enabled on the HubSpot side, yes, go ahead and enable country and territory pick list. It's based on some kind of an ISO. And the process is a bit, it's not complex, but it's not short. If you have a lot of data, you need to go and do a data fix using this wizard in Salesforce, because you need to decide if you have some kind of, well, let's say we have UAE instead of United Arab Emirates. I need to map it, the values, and we need to correct the current values we have in Salesforce. And after we finish this wizard, the state and country pick list is enabled, but do that only if you have pick lists in HubSpot.
In HubSpot. So if I do want a pick list in both sides, I need to also look at those values just to make sure most of them are fine. Even United States on both sides. There are Republic of Ireland, Republic of Iran, or different countries that Korea. Those are the ones that I keep on remember that we're bumping into Russia that have different types of names. So you got to make sure that the actual value and internal name on both sides equals, and then you won't have any pick list issues. Obviously, industry, anything you have a pick list on both sides needs to match, correct? That's kind of the basic rule. The values need to match on both sides, otherwise I'm going to get sync errors. What are the common sync errors you bumping into that we need to make sure that we don't get?
Record type permission on Salesforce for the integration user, because even if you are using system administrator as your integration user, you need to apply it all all the record types that you use on Salesforce side. It's based on the profile. So you need to validate. You'll get an error, but first, before you get an error, you need to validate that your system administrator profile can access all record types for contacts, accounts, and opportunities. If you have record types for leads, so do that as well.
So record type, an example of a record type, just so it's clear if I understand, is, for example, if I have, let's say, two pipelines, correct? And when I create an opportunity in Salesforce, I have small businesses and, let's say, enterprise businesses. And I've created a different view, what's called a record type, correct, with different fields and so on and so forth. So my assumption is that deals and opportunities will connect, but in essence, what you're saying is that if I have two record types, there's a good chance that if it's not open, if the profile is not open to all record types and not just an admin, then I'm going to get suddenly sync errors when in Salesforce that opportunity of the record type, let's say enterprise, is created, and I haven't given the authority to see that, then the connector will just get an error, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that's a really important one, because those are the ones that you can run around and it's not clear how you deal with that. What other errors have we talked about pick lists. We talk about another thing that I bumped into is when people leave the company on either side as users. And I know that also is an error that pops up. So what is the best practice? Forget about the connection between HubSpot and Salesforce. As a Salesforce, super admin, what do you think is the best way to manage a database? If someone leaves the company, do you keep that person just as inactive so we can keep the data, or should actually be moving that account to, or the contact or the account or the opportunity to a different owner?
So it depends on the business, but most of the time it's really better to set a new owner to replace the ownership of the records, all the records. Because if I left the company, what is the benefits of knowing that Miha is owner of something? We have activity history in Salesforce. We can know if I did something in the past. But of course, if I want to mass update records, we can use Salesforce. In setup, you have something like what was mass update? No.
So what I want, I had this question last week.
No.
What do we actually want to do if we do want to keep that historical owner? So we know that, let's say, Perry closed the deal and he's not in the company anymore, and we want to keep that in the CRM, in HubSpot and Salesforce. We want that historical data to be there. So I know that if it's going to become an inactive user and it's not going to sync properly because he's inactive on both sides, how do you actually manage that process? Do you just, look at the history and then move it over to someone else, or do you create another field like historical person and then you put the information there and then update it? So that's something that I didn't give an answer on how to, actually, because HubSpot doesn't have the opportunity with values to make them inactive like Salesforce does. So the value as a drop list will still be there. If I look over people, it will show me. So with owner, it's easy because I actually see deactivated owner. So obviously, but I think, as you said, it's more of a business question. How do I track that information, and how do I? But you're saying that there is a history. I could move it to someone else, and then just look at the history to see who owned this opportunity. So maybe send it to the
let's take leads as an example. I won't transfer unqualified leads. I will transfer only open leads and not even closed, only open leads, and I will transfer them. But each object has its own rules for accounts.
You'll do a mass update on both sides. I would update that, and then in HubSpot I'll do the same. In HubSpot I'll go in and I'll just move the ownership from all of those leads that I've created. But if I do a mass update on the Salesforce side, then it will automatically just change the
No,
owner.
you have the connector. You have the connector. So I will use the mass transfer wizards on Salesforce, and the connector will do the rest on HubSpot side.
Got it. So any change, another thing that I think we just need to remember is if you make a change in Salesforce, and let's say you add a country or you add an industry, and you update a pick list. So something everyone needs to remember, which I'm sure most people are aware of, is that the best way of doing it is to add that new value or new field in Salesforce first. And then when you click on review, when you click on refresh, when it's a pick list in the connector, you'll see that it will automatically bring in the new value from Salesforce. So you don't need to create that new value. You create it in Salesforce, and then you go to the connector, click on refresh, and it will actually bring in that new value. So for example, if we're going into an industry pick list and we've added, I don't know, AI now, because it didn't exist before, there's no reason to actually create it on both sides. You create it first in Salesforce, and then you refresh, and then it pops up in your pick list automatically in HubSpot, and then it's mapped over. Excellent. So we talked about duplicate companies, unresolved sync errors. Those are the things that we said we need to focus on. Opportunity syncing to deals. I'm just going through quickly before we move to more of the advanced hacks. If we go back to the list, I think these are the things that you and I looked at that we said it's important for people to actually look at when they're looking at the portals. Opportunity syncing to deals. Now, for me, opportunity syncing to deals gives me a lot of information because it allows me to actually utilize the HubSpot marketing tools, the Marketing Hub reporting based on campaigns and ROI and so on and so forth. So if I don't have the closed one and I don't see the actual closed one deal in Salesforce because I'm not syncing back the deals, then I don't get that ROI reporting information, which I think is really powerful. Targeting companies, being able to use the targeting tool in HubSpot as well. If you're not creating the accounts, then you're not getting the companies. So that's another reason to actually carry on the sync. An inclusion list. Maybe let's just talk about inclusion list for a second, just so, because I know that the error is there. My best practice, again, if you want a full database, and in HubSpot now, this marketing contacts and non-marketing contacts, so you can actually define if you want to. But my I don't know if it's a philosophy, but I think the best way is that if you have 100% the same database on both sides, so then the chance of you having sync errors are small. I always see the database. I always be able to get reporting on both sides because HubSpot gives you reporting that Salesforce doesn't, especially the marketing reporting, obviously, because it's not supposed to go into the Salesforce CRM. But I think that's really powerful. And then a lot of the time I got, let's say, 10,000 people in Salesforce and 5,000 people in HubSpot because I created an inclusion list that only pushes through a certain amount of people. Then what happens is that even when you go into Salesforce, you don't get the full reporting because my leads are in HubSpot and my MQLs going forward are in Salesforce. So if I want to do reporting across the entire funnel, I see it on the HubSpot side, but I don't even see it on the Salesforce side because my leads aren't actually, until they become MQLs, they're not moving over. So you can use the inclusion list, obviously, and decide what type of is only an MQL getting pushed, anything that I'm interested in. But I think if you can build things the right way, I would have every lead, unless you're creating things and you need to use HubSpot for careers or for all kinds of things, that is a good enough reason to exclude those and not put them into the inclusion list because you don't want those in the CRM at all. And then the other direction I think is also very important is that anything that gets created in Salesforce should pull back into HubSpot as well, whether it's a contact or a lead, for an array of reasons. But one is that if I need to nurture people at a later stage, suddenly I have to import them from Salesforce into HubSpot or send out a newsletter and as to pull in these people because they actually don't move into the database. So what you can do is you can make sure that everyone moves over to HubSpot. Now, if they're being worked or you can't email them, or for whatever reason you don't want to email them because they're being worked with the sales team or the SDR team, then you can actually bring them in as non-marketing contacts. And then one, you don't pay for them, but obviously I can't email them. I can email them one-to-one, but I can't email them through marketing or focus them on ads. So I think that is also very important to how you how you manage the database going in both directions. We talked about field mapping, which I think, as you said, is very important. That brings in a lot of mapping errors. Exceeding the API calls. I'm just going through the list again, so we'll share this afterwards. Are you exceeding API calls? We talked about the bi-directional sync. That's what I talked about now. I think that's important. The timeline sync enabled, that's important. And the automatic lifecycle stage, maybe you can go in to, maybe it's a good time now for you to just kind of show us the different hacks on how to, things that you've come across, and how to improve the actual work inside HubSpot between the two systems.
Mark, maybe we can talk a bit about selective sync.
Thank you. I forgot about that one. So you're talking about selective sync, if I understand you correctly. The inclusion list means only these people can go into HubSpot and carry on syncing. And by the way, with a selective sync, you need to always add, maybe if a Salesforce contact ID or lead ID is known, and that will solve the problem that if, let's say I'm syncing only MQLs, a person moves from an MQL onwards and then they don't sync anymore. So you should add that into your criteria if you are using the inclusion list. But the selective sync, maybe explain what you're talking about and how is it used. It's going in the other direction, correct?
Yeah, selective sync is if I want to limit sync from Salesforce to HubSpot, then we can limit the integration user. In this environment, I'm using this Salesforce user, which is the system administrator. But we can use a standard user, which can see all of our records. And we can limit some of the records that we don't want to sync from Salesforce back to HubSpot. Let's say we have two HubSpot environments. Let's say we have two HubSpot environments. We have one Salesforce. One HubSpot environment can see one department leads, contacts, accounts, and opportunities. And the second HubSpot environment, I'm not recommending you to use more than one HubSpot environment, but if you have another HubSpot environment for the second department, you can create a different Salesforce user that can see this department records. And this is what selective sync does. Got
it. Another use case that we've come across about a week ago with another customer, I think, was that in Salesforce, they were creating users. So let's say you have a product where you and I'm the salesperson, I reach out to you, we close a deal, I open you as a contact, opportunity, closed one, so on and so forth, everything, you my customer, the company. So those three objects exist in HubSpot and Salesforce. And now for the product, I introduce you. It's important for the customer success team inside Salesforce. I introduce the rest of the team to be users for the actual SaaS product. And now, for some reason, you decide that those people, we don't have to email them, we don't want to reach out to them, and so on and so forth. So that could be a use case where you'd say, okay, we need to identify those people. And then what do? You make sure that the profile of the connection of the integration user doesn't see those people, and then it won't create them in HubSpot.
Correct.
Got it.
That's
Okay.
it. You need to change the license, not the license, the profile from admin to a standard user, get him to see what you like to see, and if you don't want to sync something to HubSpot, then you can just
So technically, it's not the end of the world, but it has to be managed. So you need someone that knows what
it
they
has
do.
to be managed. It's not that simple. Yeah, you need some
And if you make
strong
changes as
Salesforce.
well, you need to manage that process as well.
Correct.
Okay, let's deep dive because we've only got another 15 minutes into some of the cool things that you were showing me before, of different ways of managing the connection between the two. We said
So we talked about do we want to push data from HubSpot to Salesforce, and when Salesforce when there is a deal and it's synced with a Salesforce opportunity, usually we don't want to sync data back, not back from HubSpot to Salesforce. But when we are using two-way sync, we can do some cool stuff using HubSpot integrations and automations. I love Salesforce, but Salesforce, when you need to do some automations in Salesforce, I don't know if some of you are familiar with Salesforce or working with Salesforce, but if I want to integrate something that I know Salesforce purchased Slack and it's a Salesforce product, but if you want to integrate Slack with Salesforce, you need to go through FL with permissions and settings. And this is the wizard, by the way. It's supposed to ease the job, but it's not that simple. And I really prefer how HubSpot is connecting to Slack. It's really easy to do. And let's go to Slack integration, and I'll show you what we can do if I want to. Usually we want to use Slack notifications on the opportunity level, deal or opportunity. We're using Slack to communicate when there is a closed one, when there is a new opportunity. We want to notify our users, and Slack integration is really unique. And I'll show you what we can do with that. If we have the deal synced properly with Salesforce, which is not really hard to do, we can use the Slack integration to notify users, Salesforce users, on new opportunities. I just created this simple workflow on HubSpot side. Okay. And what I do, I fill a property, a custom property with the Salesforce opportunity ID and the URL of my environment. So I can have a link. And after that, I'm sending a Slack notification with the Salesforce link. Let me open Slack and show you how it's look like. And I have a link to Salesforce opportunity.
That's really cool. And that took you a couple of minutes to set up, correct? And not just
yeah, it's really easy. And the benefit of it, you don't need to mess with Salesforce flows.
And you didn't even need the Salesforce admin to get involved. You just on your HubSpot side, the marketing, the RevOps,
you can do it on your own.
Go in and set it up and manage that and add what information they want. And then obviously I can do that for anything. I can do that from a form submission. I can do that for any information that I want to push to the sales team.
Correct. That's it. It's really easy to automate stuff in HubSpot. We can create renewal opportunities using HubSpot workflows as well. I don't need to mess with Salesforce flows again. And if I have a proper sync, we can do it on HubSpot side as we are doing it right here.
So what you're saying, if I understand correctly, which is a very interesting use case, which just from the conversation the last 2 days with you around this, is that a lot of the time it's just easier, quicker, more efficient to actually, even though Salesforce can do it, set up the automations, especially if these kind of things on the HubSpot side, and then it pushes the data or pushes the alert or the sequence or whatever you need to the Salesforce users. but actually, because it's easier to set up the workflows on the HubSpot side, then you can actually get things done sometimes quicker and more efficient. That's right.
Let's say that this way. Let's say that this way. I call myself Salesforce expert, and this automation took me something like 5 minutes. And if I want to do the same using Salesforce Flow, it will take me half hour.
That's a big difference, and you know exactly what you're doing. So on both sides. Okay. Wow.
I'm not talking about connecting Slack. This task.
That's obviously that's another half an hour at least.
Yeah.
If you know what you're doing. You're just talking about the different types of automations. So okay. What about creating? So about a year ago, I think I heard a Carl, and I can't remember her name, but she runs the product, or she did then run the actual connector between HubSpot and Salesforce product. There was a webinar that she talked about. And one of the best practices they brought up, which I think we've been using ever since, is that if you do have the sales or the marketing enterprise and you have custom objects, it's a good idea to actually, if you're using Salesforce campaigns in Salesforce, to not only use the workflow that actually pulls everyone as a campaign member into Salesforce, but actually to manage the data and get that data back into HubSpot. So for example, the way, and we've done this for a few companies, is to actually set up a new object in HubSpot, or two objects actually, called Salesforce campaign and Salesforce member campaign. And then you can actually use that as a separate object so that I can actually create list automations or lists and so on. So for example, if I'm have a Salesforce campaign and I have different statuses, so I have or different people, and I want to create a list of people that went to the campaign, that went to the booth, whatever information I have in Salesforce, once I have that as an object, then I can actually create different lists, email the people that came to the booth but didn't leave a card, or people that came to the booth that are MQLs. It gives you much more visibility and much more information pulling back from Salesforce back into HubSpot, and allows the marketing team or the outreach team to actually, get much more information. So I think that is something that it's worth looking at if you do have enterprise and creating that custom object. It's very easy to create a custom object now in HubSpot. Now it's a couple of clicks. And
Mark, I think we have some kind of developer environment with the campaign member sync. No?
I'll look for it while we're talking, but yeah, I think maybe we've actually set it up on the test account. Let me just look while we're looking. Yeah, I have it. Let me share my screen. So I think that's something that's also worth looking at. You see, so we set up Salesforce campaigns as a separate campaign here. When you go in here, you got Salesforce campaigns, and then here, obviously with the connector, this is not connected to Salesforce, so I can't show you. I don't think this is connected to Salesforce. But once I create the new campaign, the new object. So if you go down to custom objects, you just create a new object, put in the information. You need one primary display property, and you're good to go. Then you'll create all the fields, and then when you go into the connector, you'll have all those custom fields that need to be created. So once you sync to Salesforce, don't create anything. When you sync to the Salesforce campaign, it will pull in all the fields automatically. So you don't have to go and recreate everything. The connector will automatically do that. And then suddenly now I have a separate object. So with Salesforce campaigns, I can go in now and I can start, creating lists and the board and whatever I want to do. So I think that is, as you said, another thing that is really powerful. Also, the other thing I think which is powerful is the lead scoring, is to make sure that gets synced over and then push, obviously create an MQL and so on and so forth. That is, I think, obviously using HubSpot's. I think two other things that I would focus on is whatever analytics data and any marketing automation data, whether it's lead source or anything from the original source, any of that information, activities that's happening, all that information, you can create either properties or tasks that we talked about. Think about making sure that your sales team and your SDR team, who is working in this case, I'm assuming inside Salesforce, or maybe they're working a bit in HubSpot, but the sales team for sure is working in Salesforce. Give them as much information, as much context as possible. And the marketing automation tool in this case is HubSpot needs to pull through the connector and push through the connector as much information, whether it's through the widget or anything else that would make sense. So for example, when I'm creating a Salesforce campaign, I want to make sure that it's clear what that means so that when they reach out to someone, that's clear. The other thing, which I think is great, is to make sure you always use HubSpot campaigns. Because let me share my screen. HubSpot campaigns, and we talked about this in the last webinar around campaigns, but for some reason, what's happening is that if you're using Salesforce, a lot of the time people don't do this. So what I suggest doing, even if I have HubSpot Salesforce campaigns, my suggestion is using HubSpot campaigns for two reasons. One is it gives me different data, gives me actual data, and gives me things that that Salesforce campaigns don't give me: attribution, assets, tasks, and budgets, and so on and so forth. But the other thing that's really powerful, which is similar to what Marketo does, is that if I clone this, what it will do is it will actually give me a new version of this, but automatically with all the assets that were connected to this campaign, because the idea is to connect assets. Okay, so assets could be landing pages, blog posts. So we'll give me a new version of everything within a click. So once this is finished, I can click on View Campaign. You'll suddenly see I have a new one called Clone, okay? And it created a new blog post for me. Watch. A complete blog post. Obviously, I need to go in and update all the data, but it created a new one and just copied over the last one. So it will do this for emails and do this for everything. So that's another reason to look, I think, at both sides and make sure that you get more information. Miha, I think, is there anything else that you wanted to show? And we've got another 2 minutes. Obviously, the recording, as I said, will be as it is every week inside our website. On the HubSpot Hacks page, we have you can go back and look at all the different recordings, as we're doing this every 2 weeks. So you'll be able to go back and look at the webinar, playbooks, whatever. We've had customer success. Obviously, this webinar and the recording will be there in a couple of hours. Miha, just on maybe the last thing that we can touch in the 2 minutes we have left is maybe a mindset of the operations team or the RevOps team or business applications team looking at this connector and making sure that it's working correctly. It's not something that you can just set up and leave and expect to work like any system 100%. Things are dynamic. People are doing things on both sides. So besides setting up that notification that we talked about, is it a good practice for whoever's managing the system or both, especially on the HubSpot side, to go in once a while, do a mini audit, like on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, and just make sure everything's up to date, and then obviously update your different teams, and because I know sync errors are something that can be really problematic if the important data is not getting to the right person at the right time. So is that something that you would make sure that someone has on the, like once a week, once a month, once a quarter, they go in and look at, just look at everything, see that, make sure that nothing's actually broken besides the sync errors, and re-look at that checklist that we looked at?
Set up notifications once a day and monitor it once a week, in my opinion.
Got it. Okay. So check the integration dashboard, monitor API calls, read errors, resolve errors quickly, reconfigure, and then on a monthly, make sure that all properties and fields are syncing. As I said, the refresh is important because someone in Salesforce might have added values and you don't know why they're suddenly not popping up in HubSpot because they didn't tell you that they've already added the values. Obviously, lines of communication between both sides are very important, and have, internal meetings between both sides, making sure whoever's managing Salesforce and whoever's managing HubSpot, if it's not the same team, that they actually meet once a week or once a month to make sure that if they're making any changes that they're doing that in sync. Okay, I think that's anything else you want to add before, because we're already over time? No. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining. As I said before, the recording will be here. Thank you, Miha. That was really interesting. I think this is one of the bigger pain points that most the RevOps teams are bumping into on a daily basis, and it's just around, as you said, communication, being having standardized processes, making sure that you understand how the systems work. And if you guys need any other resources, there's also the HubSpot Salesforce integration certification that all of us have done, which I think is a great idea, to make sure that you go in and just be active inside the system. And I think you will make sure that the system and the data is flowing. Because I just heard from the CEO of HubSpot, that when they polled a good portion of their customers a couple of months ago, there were three main issues. One of the biggest issues was data flow between two systems. Okay, so thank you very much, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thanks, Micha.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Mark. Bye.